let me welcome you, Richard, to this Red Couch interview. Although we're not on the Red Couch today, we would have had to transport Richard down to Langgrove, which would have been quite a doing. But this gives us an opportunity to come and see this magnificent setting here in St. Philip at Foursquare. I've been in here, but for entertainment events, so I've never been inside this hallowed room. So welcome to the Red Couch interview. And essentially, we're going to try to find out as much as we can in a shorter space of time as we can about the Foursquare brands. And we know some of them, and some of them we probably don't know as well. But I want to talk first about, because this company and this industry, you have been a trailblazer in terms of how you have gone about establishing rum as a premium alcoholic beverage. We were talking before the interview started about the notion of the Caribbean and the fancy shirts, the colorful shirts, Hawaiian and the shirt. Beach and the Hawaiian shirts, as you call them, and the pirate costumes and the alcohol on the beach and so on. So let's talk a little bit about. I know there's a rich history, and I looked at some of the buildings behind you, and in my previous life at another institution, that group bought over those buildings from your group.
Yes.
Yes,
that's
and
right.
It became the corporate headquarters
Right.
for that group. But that's not the focus of today. So, but I do know there's a great history behind the brands.
And you would know Roebuck Street of old.
Very well.
I couldn't remember Roebuck Street of old, so you're a little older than me. So
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that sort of the average Barbadian wouldn't necessarily know is that in our rum industry, certainly in the modern era, and when I say modern era, I mean sort of 20th century, turn of the century. You had estates making rum, but it was Bridgetown bottlers. And that dates right back to the late 19th century, I think of the 1870 Act, Excise Act. So that date to licensing of stills, collection of excise tax, and having to sell in bulk. So if you were a distiller, you had to be licensed, you had to sell in bulk. You couldn't sell a bottle. So there's a way of control. And of course, but it's also getting to market. So again, you remember the old Roebuck Street days, all the country shops, you came into Bridgetown for your provisions. So ironically, it was easier for you to get your provisions of rum in Roebuck Street than, say, a distillery that might be 10 or 20 miles away, because you came into Bridgetown, you picked up all your provisions. So all the various estates sold their rum through those Barbados merchant bottlers.
What are called the commission
Yes,
agents.
and these are all very small. I mean, my great grandfather's place is, and my grandma, just a very, very tiny business. There's a picture behind there in the 60s. And they traded everything. They traded, flour and potatoes and onions, and some of them were bakeries.
Johnson and Redmond.
Correct. So that's why Johnson and Redmond, people wouldn't remember today. That was a bakery that got taken over by Purity.
Yeah.
And that's why there's a GNR rum.
Okay.
Yes, because that's what it was, and so these names that people know today, like my great grandfather R.L. Seale, Martin Dorley, he started in 1920. John D. Taylor, Alan Arthur,
John D. Taylor for Lurnham.
Field.
Yes.
And of course, many names that you may remember that are long gone: Stuart and Sampson, Instant Company, Harold Proverbs, J.O. Tudor. All of these did bottled rum, which were bought from distilleries. So So distilleries didn't have brands. The brands came, and probably when those early bottlers bottled, and we have some early bottles of Martin Dorley, you can see in the very earliest, it was very crude. It was just bottled by so and so. I mean, I have, for example, I don't have the bottle, but I have an ad where Martin Dorley is bottled in some Mount Gay rum. So it's called Old Mount Gay rum, bottled by Martin Dorley. Because at that time, Mount Gay was not bottling. They were an estate, and they would sell their rum through merchant bottlers.
Got it, yeah.
So all of those merchant bottlers, they didn't make the rum in the sense of distilling the rum, but they bought from the different estates and blended the rum. So that's the heritage of my family.
Yeah.
We come up from the merchant bottling side. not from the
Distillery side.
Yes, yeah, not from the estate.
Estate.
Yeah.
I remember as a schoolboy going up High Street, and Alan Arthur was on High
Yes.
Street.
Yes.
You know?
So they were mainly on Robert Street, but of course, if you leave Robert Street and go through Palmetto Street, then you would find Martin Dorley there on Palmetto
Correct.
Street.
Yes.
And then you keep going, and corner of Palmetto and High Street, Alan Arthur.
Alan Arthur, yes, absolutely. I remember Alan Arthur very well. Tell me a little bit more, though, about the history now of this location, because
Right.
you evolved from the Roebuck Street, then, of course, you migrated to Tudor Street, to Tudor Bridge.
Right.
And you set up a huge operation up there. And then, of course, you have this amazing facility up here.
Right.
Foursquare.
So one of the things that happened in Roebuck Street, of course, is over the years consolidation. And one of the interesting things, because I know we talk a little bit about, why certain businesses didn't survive and stuff, and I think it's very important and I think you would relate to this very well. A lot of people, like from my grandfather's generation, these were all little small businesses, but they didn't want their children necessarily to go in business. They were, they weren't rich people, but they had a wholesale business. They didn't import anything. All those Robert Street strictly wholesalers. This is well before the days of importing. They would buy from the big traditional importers like Bryden and that. They would buy from them wholesale. And so a lot of the next generation, they use their sort of improved status in life to educate their children to become doctors or lawyers or bankers. I know my father would tell you that his father would have loved nothing better for him to have become a banker, to go and work in the bank and become a bank teller, not join the business. And I think sometimes when my father came along, he did quite well. And I think one of the reasons I was raised, you shall join the business, is because he was sort of rebelling against that attitude that you must leave the family business. So that's why a lot of them have disappeared. The next generation simply didn't go in. These were very small businesses. But one of the things that my father did is, so we're actually the last, when I make that point is, we're actually last of any of those families that were in Robert Street bottling rum.
I remember a couple of others too. R.S. French was another one.
Yes, I can't remember if they did rum.
I'm not sure if they did rum. And then further up by
Shamrock did rum.
Shamrock by the Globe roundabout, you had the.
There's many.
Yeah.
Many. So what my father did, which was critical to us getting to where we are today, is he got out of Robert Street on the rum side. So he set up a blending operation at Hopefield in 1977. And if he didn't do that, we wouldn't. In other words, we were outgrowing Robert Street, consolidation. You couldn't grow your business bottling in a back room in Robert Street. I mean, if I show you the sizes of room that we used to bottle in Robert Street, I mean, it's impossible. So when he made that decision in 1977, that was arguably one of the most critical decisions he could have made, because that allowed us to grow as consolidation happened in the sort of rum bottling and brands. And, that led us then to eventually grow enough that we could take the Foursquare step. So when he moved then the whole business from Roebuck Street to Tudor Bridge, the bottling had already moved. So what happened was, how we ended up with Foursquare. So let me just give you a little bit of history on Foursquare. So in Barbados, we have sort of a state tradition of distilling rum and the Bridgetown merchant bottling. And this is actually a mirror of Scotch whiskey. All of those Scotch whiskey brands that you know, Johnny Walker and Doers and Teachers and that, they were all blenders as well, not distillers. They bought from the rural distilleries, blended with the bigger industrial distilleries in the south, and created their blends. That's where blended Scotch whiskey comes from. And so we were very much the mirror of that. So Foursquare, but the thing about Foursquare is it has a very long history. Cane has been grown here from about the 17th century. But when you look back in the 17th century, this whole area is named Foursquare, and there's several little estates, and the sort of, the records, and they're just sort of named by the proprietor. From the early 18th century, we can identify this physical sort of sugar works that became Foursquare. It wasn't called Foursquare yet. It would really only be sort of in the recognizable as Foursquare, we know today, and named Foursquare from about the turn of the 19th century, so 1801, something like that. But Foursquare basically went from small estate, became big estate. And what happened at the turn of the 20th century is we had a big radical restructuring of our sugar industry, because sugar prices plummeted in the late 19th century from about 1883 because of the competition from beet sugar. And the island really struggled, which led to the 1897 and a royal commission to investigate, because things were incredibly bad in Barbados in this period. And one of the things that came out of it was to sort of upgrade Barbados from individual estates making sugar to central factories. So at 1900, there were about 430 sugar estates on the island, and 430 sugar works, virtually. Every estate crushed its own cane. And by the 1920s, we had established about 20 central factories. And by the 30s, I think it was about 30 of them. And of course, then estates didn't grind their own cane. They sent cane to these central factories. In our era, from 1970, there's about 10 of them. Of course, now all the historic ones are gone. Portville started in 1980, so all the historic ones were gone. Foursquare, being one of the larger estates, became one of those central factories at the turn of the century, and it was then separated from the estate. So the factories were then owned by those who fed them, and we then had that other restructuring in the industry in 1970, where all the factories were then put into one company, BSIL, and all of the farmers had shares in BSIL, whether you were a previous factory owner or not. So that's a little bit of sugar history. But the thing about Foursquare is the Foursquare went through everything. And Foursquare would have made rum, and we think Foursquare stopped about 1890 making rum. And the funny thing is, because it developed as a central factory, the old boiling house is long gone. So the factory buildings that are there that house the sugar factory or sort of turn of the century built, early 20th century. But the still house is 1730. And do you know they were still up to when the Foursquare Sugar Factory closed in 1988? They were still calling that building the still house. And they're still in it. Hadn't made around in 100 years. They were using it as storage. But so that building got untouched. But the boiler, the sort of boiler house that would have served Foursquare through the 1990s is long gone. And so when we came then, it closed in 88. We bought it in 94. But the reason why we bought it is one of the things, another big, huge decision my father made was when he purchased the Alinata brand.
Yes. Yeah.
So he purchased Martin Dorley, Alinata, and you probably remember the history with that. Plantations was in financial trouble. They owned Alinata. Alinata was in financial trouble, and they were selling. And
so you would say that's a watershed.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That, and certainly for me, because he did that in '93, and I officially joined the business in '93. I sort of worked summers and Christmas and all that, but officially joined in '93. And so, of course, here I joined, and he basically makes the biggest purchase he's ever made in his life. And so that changes the whole outlook for us on rum, because although our roots are as a merchant trader, so we're doing, we're selling other products besides rum. From '93, rum now is by far and away the single most important part of the portfolio. We acquire a very historic, prestigious brand, Martin Dorley. Sort of king in sort of 30s, 40s, 50s. First bottled brand exported from Barbados. And of course, what happened with Martin Dorley is they had merged with Alinata, I think around 1970, 71. And they didn't do well out of that merger. Alinata more focused on Alinata, and the Dorley's brands sort of went down. And so we basically get this opportunity to buy this brand, this real historic, wonderful historic brand, at a low ebb, of course. And but you see what you've got, and you realize what you've got, And now, so the outlook changes completely. We now start to think about export because this brand has some history of exporting. You know, because export is very expensive. A lot of people will ask me, well, why can't I get this brand abroad or that brand abroad? And every brand you choose to export costs a lot of money. And, you know, one of the reasons why we simply chose to export, say, a brand like Martin Dorley over, say, a brand like Oak Brigham is simply because they had a foot in the door. So you build on what little foundation you have, you start with that. And so we bought, and that, so as I say, export, but also change our perspective in stocks. You know, in Barbados, like many islands, majority of the business on aged rum, because you know we're not a rich society, so you know, aged rum is a small percentage. But when you buy a brand like Dorley's and you're thinking about exporting, you suddenly have to think about aged stocks. And the other thing that really came about as well, and this is really what has, I think, changed things, is, and you know, I'm going to contrast it a little bit with the sugar industry. And I'm not trying to be critical of the sugar industry because there were many reasons, there were many structural constraints on it. I mean, there's, you know, things were set to suit Britain, not set to suit the West Indies. And so one of the challenges of the sugar industry, of course, is it never was able to sell anything more than a commodity. And of course, once we became uncompetitive in making a commodity, then, as you can see, we have no more sugar industry. And for much of rum's early exports, and a substantial amount still today, is commodity business. But we can't compete. But the flip side of that is, we don't appreciate what we have. So we have a provenance in rum that's second to none. You know, rum was really developed here in 1640s. We have a know-how that's been passed down from generation to generation. We have arguably the best climate on the planet in which to mature spirits. So, you know, one of the reasons why Barbados rum has been sort of well received over these many, many years is because of the combination of know-how and climate. And so one of the things that we did very differently was to go after a completely different audience. And to go only on the top end. I mean, I say that we do have some more mainstream, but even then within the mainstream, we're premium. So in other words, we, you know, wherever category we're in, our rums are higher position. But mainly our business really is built on the higher end. And so to the point where, you know, 90% of our production here goes in a barrel. Whereas, you know, 25 years ago, we were selling the other way around. 90% we sold didn't go in a barrel. And I sometimes like to tell the story this way. My grandfather would have never conceived that we could export rum, because rum was just something
you drink locally.
Yeah, you can't sell rum to English people. And then I very much remember going at my father's generation, and I know my father's generation was very excited because they saw the diaspora. And it's taken to my generation to say, no, I'm going after it. English
mainstream.
I go in after, and I don't go after rum market, because one of the things that's happened is, and again, this is another sort of reflection of our colonial heritage, and we were discussing earlier how we have a strange scenario in rum, where, you know, if you're from Bourbon, Kentucky, and you fly over to Europe and you see a bottle of bourbon, it will be a brand you recognize, and it will taste like bourbon. If you're a Scotsman and you fly to America, and you'll see a bottle of Scotch whiskey, and it will be a brand you recognize, and it will taste like Scotch whiskey. Rum is the only category, and this is our colonial legacy, where a man could leave Barbados or Jamaica, arrive in a country, see a brand of rum purporting to be from Barbados or Jamaica, of which he has never heard of, and taste nothing like any rum he ever knew. That's the colonial legacy. And so one of the things we had to do is to say, well, no, we're not going after that business. we're going after Scotch whiskey. And we're not going after, like Bacardi. Bacardi is not our competitor. People hear about Bacardi, it's a big rum brand. No interest to us whatsoever. I shouldn't think that not one single bottle we sell is at the expense of a bottle of Bacardi. Our rums, our market penetration is into Scotch whiskey or bourbon whiskey or brandy or other products. And that's largely because the rum industry that was created outside is largely a caricature of the real rum industry. Captain Morgan, Spice Rum, and Bacardi, and all these. Which, again, I mean, most Barbadians would go abroad and taste a bottle of Bacardi and say, well, that doesn't taste like any rum I know. And so we don't go there. We show them what real Barbados rum is.
So, Richard, you sound, as I sit here and listen to you, I hear a marketer, rather than a rum producer, because a lot of what you're talking about is because you've taken old brands that have been around for generations. And in fact, I remember, the ESA Field brand was seen as the poor man brand. You're gonna hit an ESA Field, and so on. So what you have been explaining to me, both in terms of the history and the evolution, suggests to me that while you may be a great distiller, which you obviously are, I'm hearing a supermarketer who has been able to.
The trouble is, that's true, but that's the only way I know how to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas a good marketer knows 10 different ways.
Well, we'll see.
They always say, I've always believed if you have a good story to tell, you just tell
the story. Yeah. Well, speaking of telling the story.
But yeah, I mean, to sort of explain a little bit, like you say, in other words, right here in this market, locally, we obviously are in the whole range of the market. But when we go abroad, we're only going out and talking because that's where we compete. Like, for example, I have a lot of fans that, bringing ESA Field. I can't find an ESA Field abroad. It's like, I can't go against Bacardi ESA Field. I don't have the depth of money needed to do that. Yes, 9 out of 10 people will prefer ESA Field to Bacardi, but at that area of the market, the taste is not important. Is the muscle of the money, the muscle to be go in a bar, you're going to put my rum in the cocktails, you're going to pour my rum. It's all muscle. Whereas when you're going now with the end market, where we're going is all quality. And so the fact that Barbados might be an expensive place to produce rum becomes irrelevant.
Because it's a quality product.
Correct.
Yeah. So speaking though of now producing a quality product, I want to segue a little bit into the fact that over, 4 years, you have won this massive international award. I remember the first year when it was announced, and this announcement came, and we read it in the news, swelling up with a sense of pride that we could compete against the international spirits in the world. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So that one is a little bit confusing because there's two competitions, and sometimes in advertising, it's just a simple message. We won a big competition in London, which is a simple message, which is true. But just to sort of give you the whole story. So there are two competitions in London, and the first one is the arguably still the most prestigious one. It started in 1969, and certainly growing up, it was the kind of competition we would look, wow, I want to win a medal there. And that competition, and they have big, lovely black tie dinner awards, and and all of the best people in the whole industry, and the sort of chair of the competition is usually some leading person. In fact, I'll tell a funny story with that. In a year, we won it in 2018. So in the IWS, so that's the only competitions that we do, because the two most prestigious. One of the problems with competitions is that so the IWSC started this in 1969.
IWSC stands
IWSC,
for, what does that
International Wine and Spirits Competition.
Right. That's for the audience.
And what's happened is we have a whole load of copycats, and a lot of the copycats are just cheap to put on your supermarket shelf. I won a gold medal at the so-and-so competition. It's just rubbish. So it's like the Oscars versus everything else for people. Yeah. Then there is a second competition that came around about 25 years ago called the International Spirits Challenge. And that's trying to compete with the IWSC. So that's also very prestigious, big black tie dinner awards. But really IWSC is kind of the one we love. But both are very serious competitions, you know, judges trained, blah, blah, blah. So the IESC, we've won it 5 years in a row, Rum Producer of the Year. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
You won it in 20 as well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So, but that competition, one of the reasons why we've talked about that competition is that competition does a little unique thing. What it does is it takes all of the trophy winners in each category, a rum, a whiskey, a brandy, a gin, and whatever, and they sit down with all the category chairmen, so they cheer the judging panel, and they decide what spirit is the best spirit of the whole show. And in 2018, 17, can't remember, they awarded it to one of our Foursquare vintages.
I remember
and
that.
It was the first time in their 25-year history that a rum had won it. And a rum hasn't won it since. We haven't won it since either. But the IWSC, which is, as I say, the, you know, sort of the one from 1969.
69.
Probably my heart is most into to win. We've won it 3 in the last 5 years. And we were shortlisted this year, but we didn't win. But they give a trophy, a single trophy to the best rum. And they get about 230 entries from all over the world. So in addition to giving the best rum producer, they give a single trophy. And they do this in each category, whiskey, whatever. They give a single trophy for best rum. And we won it in 2016, and we won it again this year. So that was pretty cool. So we didn't win the rum producer this year, but we won the best rum. So it's all right.
Yeah.
Well, you walk away with something you can't complain.
So you walk away with the Oscars.
Yes.
Yeah. So both of these are sort of like Oscar events then?
Yes, these are big, yes.
The others are
I know sadly this year they couldn't have their black tie dinners because of
COVID.
Yes.
Yeah. But you said there are all these other competitions.
Oh,
so,
you send in $100 and out you get a medal. And
So
it's sad because it then sort of
cheapens
ruins. Yes.
So you have the Oscars and you have the wieners, I guess, you know.
So, but so that's why. And so we wouldn't do any of those other ones. They would do our But he does. I mean, this year, for example, the short list for rum producer was us, one from Martinique, which one, and one distillery from Jamaica, and it just shows you, you know, these are the traditional producers of rum, or Barbados, Jamaica, Martinique, and they're still the best producers in the world.
Now rum in a sense was seen, particularly locally, and I'm saying essentially locally, you know, it's sort of like the poor man's drink kind of thing. You know, the tourist, the visitor coming to Barbados, he wants to taste the Barbados rum and so on. But I've always been amused when I go to parties and so on that, you know, the party is sometimes measured by the quality of whether you have a single malt scotch and that kind of stuff and so on. But if you ask for a rum and something else, a rum and coconut water or something, somehow it's almost as if you're not with it kind of thing. So what you have done is really to
and
make
we sort
rum.
of mocked the previous prime minister because he was a rum drinker.
Right.
Somehow that was
a bad thing. You know, yeah. So, but of course he did a lot for the brand because he loved his Barbados rums.
Yeah, we should be more horrified by a prime minister who chooses another category than rum.
Agreed. And having now established yourself as the, at least in competition at the highest level as the preeminent spirit in the world, it gives an opportunity to make rum more sexy in a sense, from a drinker's.
Well, you see, you've got an artificial creation, and you know you can't overturn sort of 300 plus years of a sort of colonial mindset quite so easy. It's not easy. But you've got this artificial construct because, of course, we charge much higher duties on imported spirits. And we, of course, at the rum industry too, you know, we have to make rum available at a sensible price, you know, and so you create this artificial construct that, you know, whiskey is superior to a rum because it costs more, and it doesn't. What's happened is it's paying much more duty, so it creates the illusion that it's more, but the price that it has left Scotland is no different. And that's one of the beautiful things when we go abroad. We're competing on a completely level playing field. You know, most of my rums sell more expensive than typical whiskeys, you know. And so we have to earn our place strictly on merit. But as I say, that creates this construct. So we do have a situation, as you well know, in our society. If you're successful, you want to show that success, and to show that success is, you know, a big house and a big car, and you don't drink rum anymore. And of course, for me, it's a travesty. You know, I don't even care if you drink my competitor's brand, but for goodness sake, drink rum. And it's also very much a tragedy on the hospitality industry. And one of the things I've seen change, which I think you'll agree with me, is on the food side. But we haven't changed on the drink side. So on the food side, once upon a time, you went to hotels about 30 years ago, they would pride you on having, you know, the latest best Angus steak or whatever. Now we go there and we can get a barracuda and a breadfruit cuckoo and the best.
Absolutely.
Yes, finally.
Finally, yeah.
You know, one of the things that happened in Robert Street is, as you had consolidation, people took over brands. I mean, for example, my father, back in the 60s, he bought Harold Proverbs. Harold Proverbs used to bottle a rum called Pretty Girl, and he continued to bottle Pretty Girl rum. And I think at that time he stopped bottling Harold Seale rum, because that's what happened if you bought over a business and their brand was better than your brand.
You went to that.
Because in that business it was much more. It was also, a lot of it was a service business. In other words, you had your customers, so your customers came in and saw you, so you could, well, swap this one for that one, and so he did. So that would, and that's faded out. And then, as I say, today we bottle. And then in the 60s he also bought ESA Field. So that's how we have that brand. And then in the 90s we bought Martin Dorley, Alinath, John D. Taylor, and we've always kept those going. But as I say, there's been some consolidation over the years. So for example, when Alinath bought John D. Taylor, they dropped John D. Taylor rum, kept John D. Taylor Falernum, but dropped Alinath Falernum. So that's how we've lost some of these brands. But we've tried to maintain and keep the brands alive. In terms of what I created, so one of the things that's happened, as I mentioned to you, we're very analogous to Scotch whisky in that brands were first created independently, distilleries. So one of the things that's happened in the last 50 years is distilleries have started to create their own brands. And a lot of people don't realize this. For example, a brand like Glenfiddich is created in 1964. The first single malt brand, 1964. Because all of these single malt distilleries used to sell in bulk to the brands to create the blended brand. Yes. And then the single malt distilleries decided, you know what, we're going to not do a blended rum, we're going to do a pure single distillery product. Of course, in Barbados, we had the odd scenario where because we sort of, consolidate. Obviously, all of our blends come from one distillery. So eventually, it made perfect sense to create the Foursquare brand as a distillery brand. The part that I did that was a bit novel was, rather than create a permanent brand, Foursquare is a series of releases. So vintages, special name releases. And that's kind of been the novel part. And yes, people will tease me that was a great marketing move, but it really wasn't done out of so much out of marketing. It was more, again, done out of a desire, because one of the things about the spirits business is brands pride themselves on consistency, and it's built on consistency. So it's built on, you can buy that bottle of Old Brigham and rely, or you buy that bottle of Johnny Walker or Jim Beam or whatever. And I would look at sort of my friends in the wine business with a bit of jealousy, because they'd be like, well, this year doesn't taste as good as last year, we call it a vintage. Or, they come up with a release and it has it's a special release. And some spirit brands are doing special release. So, and I love to do different things. And so, I just decided that I needed an outlet. And to be honest with you, it's also a financial constraint. Because as you create a brand, let's say I want to create, well, we have our Seale 10-year-old, but let's say I wanted to develop our Seale 12-year-old, and I wanted our Seale 12-year-old to use Madeira casks. Well, I got to buy 12 Madeira casks for the next 12 years. Whereas what we were able to do is to see when opportunities to buy excellent casks came up, buy the casks, not fuss too much about creating a permanent brand with them, just trying to create an excellent release with them. So it in some ways also, and that's, that's one of the great things actually when you look at rum history, is that it's all about distillers responding to changes and adapting to the environment. So for example, when all those central factories occurred, I mean, that changed everything. So, part of where you go is also about external factors brought onto you. Which would also probably explain, is a good segue for me to explain, why do we crush cane back here at Foursquare? Well, it's very simple. So when we bought here and put a distillery here, even though we'd gone back to historic estate, we didn't fully recreate the estate model, because of course we didn't crush cane and make sugar and molasses here. We would get our molasses from Port Vale, and then of course eventually now we have imported molasses, but I was importing molasses for many years. So we keep seeing this shrinking sugar industry, and we suddenly think to ourselves, this is the catastrophe, because we could have a scenario where Barbados, which gave the world rum, not having a blade of sugar cane grown, and therefore we cannot let that happen. And so a couple of years ago, I started working with Larry Warren, Nicholas Abbey, back in 2016. And he crushed cane for me, and then in 2018, I started crushing cane here again, put in a mill. So first time Foursquare had crushed cane since 1988. Put a second mill in 2020. And so right now at Foursquare, we use, yes, imported molasses, local molasses from Portville, juice from Nicholas, and juice we crush our own. And it's a good example of how you're responding to and adapting to a crisis, because that's what we sort of have, and we're sort of taking it in our own hands to make sure that we survive this crisis, make sure Barbados rum is protected, and make sure that there's sugar cane growing in Barbados, and sugar cane in Barbados is going to make rum. So I'm actually very proud of that, and that's really been developing a lot. And it's actually a very good, one of the things I love about it too is that, when Larry set up Nicholas Abbey back in 2006, he purchased the property first. He didn't have any money yet for a still, so he bought old rum from me. And so next couple of years, he bought old rum, and he would sell the rum he was selling was my rum, but aged up there. And then eventually he started distilling and making his own rum. And so I helped him. Now he mills cane, but he mills more cane than he needs, that he can distill, because he's still small, but he needs to mill, there's stuff. So now he's helping me. So it was a nice
partnership.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's bring it home, and we look to the future. As I hear this fascinating story about rum, and in particular Foursquare, and how you have taken what was seen as a not so sexy item and taken it onto the international stage and competing against the best spirits and so on in the world. I look at upcoming generations of young Barbadians, and I'm saying, if this is an industry that is such a vital part of who we are, our history, our culture, our entertainment, even our tourism, the notion, the typical notion of, as we talked about earlier, of the tourist is the guy in the Hawaiian shirt with all the bougainvillea and hibiscus all over the shirt, and green and red and all the clashing colors, but he's holding a cocktail of rum, in his hands on the beach and so on. That's been the traditional thing. But we know that you've taken this brand and you have now expanded it onto the world stage and so on. But I'm looking now at young generations of Barbadians. Is there not, given what you have done here, an opportunity for young Barbadians now to see this industry as perhaps in the same way as you see banking or any other industry, to see this as some place to learn about this industry? You mentioned, for example, the teaching that you do in terms of barmen and so on. But it strikes me that perhaps there is an opportunity for young Barbadians to be more engaged in this.
Well,
this
one of the
kind
things that
industry,
we do, one of the things that we do is we work with the Caribbean Science Foundation. We take two interns every year from them. But of course, that's just giving them a broad experience. Doesn't mean they're going to go in distilling. That's just they're in other words, those interns are always in science. In terms of the industry, that's where the industry has to build, and this is one of the sort of challenges that we have with government. There's two challenges we have with government, and they're interrelated. The first challenge that we have with government, because of course government wants instant success, and they want to tell you you're going to sell hundreds of millions next year. And one of the great challenges we have with government is that this is a very long horizon business. So when I sell a product like our Seale 10-year-old, I can only sell what is there. In other words, I have rum that's 10-year-old this year. I have rum that will turn 10 next year. It's 9 this year. I have rum that's 8 this year. It's a very long horizon business. So no marketeer can come to me and say, well, I have a great marketing plan. It's going to grow you 20, 30, 40%. And if the stock's not there, it can't happen. So it's a very, very long horizon business. And as you know as well as me, governments don't like long horizon answers.
Yeah, but they may not have a long horizon
exactly.
themselves. So
they want to know what are you doing to double or triple business next year.
Early sunset in some cases.
And 25 years ago I had 2,000 barrels. Now I have 42,000 barrels. It takes time. But related to that as well, and it's an issue too in the sugar industry, because when government looks at sugar, they look at it, they can only think of a big industry. And I always try to explain that big industry, that mammoth factory and 30,000 acres, that will never happen. But you can create a sugar industry. And the trouble is with rum is they kind of turn to us a little bit of rum, and it really is, from an export point of view of brands, it's just us and Mount Gay. Nicholas is great because it's not exports, but it's all foreign exchange. But they're small, and you can't really have an industry sort of on two players. So what I try to explain to them is that they need to create an environment where we have 10 distilleries. So like Nicholas is small, but imagine if we had 10 of them. So the way that it's going to be more relevant to young people, and seeing a career, is if we grow the industry. And it can't be just about two players growing. It has to be.
Gotcha.
So that's what I would like to see
happen.
Yeah. I want to see more Nicholases. We do have an interest where there's a family-owned Scotch whisky distillery, lovely people. They have been looking at coming to Barbados for a couple of years. They still haven't quite found the right spot. They were looking for a local partner. Things didn't quite work out. But their plan would be a distillery not quite as big as us or Mangay, but bigger than Nicholas. And for me, another example of a great example of what we want to see in terms of growing an industry. Because you can't expect an industry to grow on the backs of two people. But you need to grow, and that's what we need to see. And of course, you might think, oh, hang on a minute, isn't that competition? Yes, but it's raising Barbados' profile. And you see the pie out there is big. It's a big market over there. And so the best thing you can do is to raise your own profile and then all the brands. I mean, when you think of any Scotch whiskey brand, I'm sure all brands love to pat themselves on the back, but they're all living on the strength of the category. They all get this sort of. So the more that we do to increase Barbados' reputation as a rum producing nation, the more brands do better. And it does bring me one of the wonderful things that does happen in rum is that you might think we're all sort of competitors, and I'm competitor in Mount Gay or I'm competitor with Jamaica, but when we're out there, we're all ambassadors.
Absolutely.
And there's a tremendous camaraderie because we're all sort of fighting the same fight.
Yeah, because your competition can't be each other.
No,
your competition has to be.
And we all
the big
benefit
spirits,
from
the uplifting of the.
Yes.
Yeah. Look into the future. I mean, this for me is a pet peeve, and I have, we say tourism is our business. We know all the slogans and so on. We know that rum is intertwined heavily with tourism, but for me, I don't get that. Over generations, we recognize that tourism is the mainstay of our economy. It's the main driver of our economy. And yet we wait until tertiary level to begin to teach tourism-related studies. And I always find that a little bit bizarre. If these things are really important, should we not? Now, of course, we know we don't want to be encouraging young children in primary school.
This is one of the delicate areas.
Yeah. So
I've had requests, for example, to bring students through here, and I've had to say, well, how old are they?
Yeah.
And when they tell me they're underage, I say, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And they're like, no, but we just wanted to. And I'm like,
so can we
do it.
Nationally, we have to find a mechanism where we can teach. It's like you want to be able to teach it without saying we want you to get up and grow up and use it and abuse it and so on. That's not what you're trying to say, but you want them to understand that this is also part of your legacy. It's part of, and it's also very much a part of your future because it's one of the few items that we really produce completely, totally here.
Well, so one of the things, what I'm trying to do, work towards that. Again, these things take some time. So I'm currently sponsoring 2 postdoc fellowships at UE. Mm-hmm. And the idea really is to create kick-off research. And research needs funding. And there is quite a bit of research because of sugar from 1640s to about mid-1800s. But there's a big gap sort of from about mid-1800s to turning 20th century, which is a story a little more relevant to us, like our centralization, things like that. And so I'm sponsoring research in that area. But the idea is this is how these things work. You sponsor postdoc, maybe some PhDs eventually will propose a thesis in the area. There have been some done. Then eventually you hope your next step is that it's a course in the department. When it becomes an established course in the history department, then suddenly it may creep into the A-level syllabus. Or sorry, I'm old-fashioned. A-level.
I'm with you.
And then it creeps into the O-level syllabus. So, I mean, that's how it gets in. Something in your textbook at O-level is rooted in somebody's research before it. So we're there, we're starting there, and that's the idea, is to bring it more mainstream and also to bring it a little more rum focus, because there's lots of work done on sugar, and sort of rum sort of gets the short shrift in coverage. And so yes, that's very much conscious in my mind, and it is conscious in my mind to have Barbadians feel a sense of pride about that we have an industry here in which we are one of the best in the world.
We are, yeah.
So I think most Barbadians know that we have a tourist industry because we are one of the best places to visit in the world. And I think then we just need to know that. And it's quite, again, it's very interesting too when you look at the history, because when Barbados You know, when we were first sort of self-governing, we set up, before one of the BIDC was set up in the 50s, I think it's called Barbados Investment Industrial Board or something like that.
Industrial and Development Corporation, I think it was called, something like that.
No, even before that.
Even before that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was the
okay.
50s.
Yeah.
And, you know, they built all the industrial estates. Go on here, 6 rooms. Because the thought was at that time to diversify, obviously, from sugar, but also to get people out of the field. And so we had a vision that people in factories, because a factory was better than the field, but of course, in other words, we were going to try and do what is done in the Far East. Thank goodness we didn't do it, because that's a horrible situation. Thank goodness we aspired higher. But that was the early vision, sort of. And it's kind of a tragedy because staring you right there in the face
was the opportunity. Yeah.
Was this indigenous industry in which we are world class. And we've sort of been searching for other areas to try to be, to other manufacturing areas. And don't get me wrong, I have a problem in various areas. But
nothing before it's
right here under your nose.
Yeah. Well, perhaps nothing before its time, and and again, you need the driver. You need somebody with the passion for the industry. You know, I could be passionate about selling rum, but it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily passionate about the industry that is rum. And clearly, in your case, your vision and your passion, you know, transcends just the ordinary perception of what the rum industry is. So I think perhaps maybe nothing before its time, which is why I mention the whole question of now how do we move forward from here in terms of getting that acceptance at the national level.
Well, one of the things that we're working on, which we hope to complete, is the geographic indication for rum. And the best way I can describe that is, you know, we have standards for rum, written and unwritten. And what a GI basically does is to try to codify those and protect them. And kind of the best way for me to illustrate that is to kind of show you what could go wrong. So for example, you know, my dad's 83. Somebody might put a big check on his table and say, I want to buy Foursquare. You then don't know if that buyer is going to protect the standards of Barbados rum. You don't know if that buyer is going to say, well, you know what? This aging in this Barbados is expensive. It's a hot climate. I think I'm going to age up in Scotland. You know what? Why am I bottling here in Barbados? I'm a big corporate company. I got giant bottling lines up in Europe. I'm going to bottle up there. In other words, I'm going to take this product and I'm going to cut costs and I'm going to do what I need to do. But this rum, no, I don't think I'm going to worry to sell a 10-year-old rum. I'm going to just put it in a fancy package, make you think it's 10 years old, call it 10th anniversary. Yeah. And dodgy names and, you know, and I'll put some flavoring or something in it so you think it's smooth. Yeah. And all the integrity, you take this Barbados name and you abuse the hell out of it.